All right, everybody. Today we are talking about representation in movies and whether or not audiences are turning on it or are there other variables at play. Specifically, talking about The Little Mermaid versus Spider-Man versus Aladdin. We're also going to talk about Cleopatra a little bit later. We're going to give a review for that show as well as a review for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Now, I'm sure you're all aware that there's a lot of diversity happening, and I'm personally am fine with that. But there seems to be a lot of pushback and a lot of people getting very angry, and some people say that that's just because they're racist. I don't think so. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. And so when it comes to creating new characters versus race bending old characters, that's really where I think that's important for this conversation to go, specifically when it comes to the Little Mermaid, because the Little Mermaid is, in the new live action edition, a race banded character. They changed the race. And so I'm not really I don't really have a huge position on whether or not it's morally wrong to race bend characters. I think that, I don't really want to put a limit on creativity in and of itself, but I do think that we need to understand that people have connections to the characters that they love. And this goes right back to whether or not diversity or representation matters. I think it really does, because why else would people get so offended when characters that they love and look up to are race bent? And obviously, every character is different. For example, Nick Fury was white in a lot of the Marvel comics, but obviously in the MCU, Samuel L. Jackson plays him. He's black, and everybody seems to be okay with that because Samuel L. Jackson is freaking awesome as Nick Fury, and that also seems to be a very interesting part of the equation, is in that winning seems to cure a lot of things, especially when it comes to social dissent. If if Nick Fury ended up being really, really bad, or people didn't like the character or like the portrayal, then perhaps it might have been received a little bit differently, especially, although bear in mind that 10 years ago when he was cast, things weren't as politically divisive as they are now, unfortunately. Back to the idea of, political, being divided over whether or not it's okay to race bend, a particular character. I think representation does matter because it's important for people to see themselves, be able to do good things, especially people who come from, broken backgrounds. Stories are the things that encourage us and give us inspiration and hope and light. And so, as someone who wants to be a storyteller, I'm all for, writing stories and making stories that can do that for people. And so, I think it's because that representation does matter emotionally to people, and that's why there is so much backlash whenever a character has a significant change, such as being race bent. And so I don't think it's necessarily being racist. I think it's just people have connections to their characters and they love them for what they are. Whenever there's a radical change, it people can get very, very upset about that. And obviously, I don't think it should be as upset as they are being. For example, when Little Mermaid was announced that Halle Berry was going to be the actress, everybody immediately said, well, not everybody, but a lot of people immediately said that this movie is doomed to fail, and that it's going to be a flop. It's a woke disaster. It's a woke nightmare. It's like, guys, you haven't even seen the movie yet. You don't know if it's good or bad until you see it. And the color of the actor or actress in the film does not determine whether the movie is good or bad. This is where I would differ from a lot of people on the woke side. Just because you have a diverse cast does not automatically mean that the movie is good. There are lots of trash movies that are very diverse. Similarly, there are a lot of amazing movies that are also diverse. The color of the actor doesn't necessarily change the quality of the movie. And isn't that the way it should be? Because we don't want to be limiting actors' ability to perform and give amazing performances to their skin color, now do we? Right, because we're so much more than our skin color. So whether or not a performance is amazing should be dependent on the person themselves, not the color of their skin. And now, we can hop over a little bit to characters where their character's race has an impact on their story. And now that's where this does become important. You can't cast a white dude as Black Panther because Black Panther's African origins is an instrumental part of his character development. His history and connection to that land and to those people are incredibly important to his development as a character, and that's where race bending really just makes no sense whatsoever. Now, again, in the case of a character like Nick Fury, as far as I know from the comics, the dude's race never really, played into his development, or at least that's not what they were going for in the movies. And so the color of the actor playing a character really only matters if the racial background of the character is important to the plot and the character development. A character like The Little Mermaid doesn't matter because it's not a part of the story. It's not an essential part of the plot. The race of the character versus the relationship to the race of other characters, it's not an essential story thread, and therefore it doesn't matter. If you watch the Little Mermaid movies, like all of her sisters, they're all just a bunch of different races. And considering that it is a fantasy fairy tale, I don't really think accuracy is something to be, whining and complaining about in the first place, because it's a fairy tale. Accuracy is not what we're going for here. It's just supposed to be a fun and entertaining movie, and having seen it, I thought it was that. I thought it was, perfectly fine for a carbon copy of, the original with some minor insignificant differences. And so that's really the diversity thing. I do believe that representation matters, and I want everybody to be able to see themselves on screen and be inspired. People come from all different types and places and backgrounds, and so it's only logical and fair that different kinds of characters with different backstories are going to appeal to different kinds of people more. And, I don't want to be the kind of person to look down upon or say, you don't need that inspiring story. You don't need Black Panther. Black Panther's not important, or whatever. And so when it comes to, because it really does matter. And as someone who, every single main character I've ever enjoyed watching has always been me. Like, I've never had to think about what it looks like to not, what it feels like to not be represented. And I'm not going to be arrogant enough to say that other people should just feel the way I feel, because they've had a completely different life experience. In fact, a lot of people have the opposite experience than I had. So it doesn't make any sense that I would expect them to feel the way that I feel. And so I'm not going to throw that expectation out there. And I want to always consider myself, a person who's open to seeing all kinds of different stories with different characters and different backgrounds that can inspire different people. And when a story is really, really good, those characters can inspire everybody, even people that aren't necessarily of the same color or background as they are. And so I think a good example of that is Across the Spider-Verse. I love Miles Morales. Miles Morales is awesome. And of course, he's going to mean a lot to the Black community. And I believe Puerto Rican, I said he also is, or his mother's. Please forgive me if I got this wrong. I think that his mother is Puerto Rican as well. And so, of course, he's going to mean a lot. But he also means a lot to me. Why? Because the character is just freaking amazing. He's awesome. He's cool. And again, this goes back to diversity doesn't automatically mean it's good. You still have to have a good plot, good action, good dialogue, good character development, and Across the Spider-Verse has that. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Across the Spider-Verse is being so successful as opposed to The Little Mermaid. That and The Little Mermaid race swapped a character that everybody already loved, whereas Miles Morales is just an original Black character. And I think that that's really the best option going forward, is let's just make original characters that are freaking awesome, that lots of different people can enjoy and love, like Black Panther and Miles Morales and Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi is another guy. I love that movie. I've only seen it once, but I loved it. And the color. People say, oh, it shouldn't matter, but it does matter to people. for whatever reason. And as someone who has never been in a position to feel like they're lacking something in that category, I'm not going to sit here and tell other people that it shouldn't matter to them, especially if they've never felt, really represented. And so those are my thoughts on diversity and, inclusion in the movie space. It doesn't automatically make the movie good, but I'm not necessarily. But I think going forward, the best thing to do is just make original characters. I personally am not super upset about characters being race bent, but knowing that people have such a heartfelt connection with their characters, it's understandable that they would be pissed off if one of their favorite characters was race bent. Even though I don't think the race of the character is necessary, even if the character's race is not the most important aspect of that character. Again, The Little Mermaid, the race of the character, honestly, to me, doesn't make much of a difference. It's more about her charm, charisma, and her wants and needs, and who she is as a person, not necessarily the skin color of the character. But those are my thoughts on that, and I hope that's helpful. Now let's get into our Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse review, and then we're going to be doing our Cleopatra review after. So, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. What can I say? It's fantastic. And to be fair, I haven't watched the first one yet, but I'm going to when I'm done making this review. It's super good. I would say that this is one of the... It could be very close to one of the top 10 comic book movies I've ever seen. It is absolutely fantastic. The action is good. And as someone who's interested in becoming an animator, God, I love the visuals on this movie. In fact, I what time is it? I might run back to the theater and watch it tonight. I'm not sure because it was so good. And Miles Morales' character is great. And I love that we're getting a view of a different kind of family. I'm a very open person. I don't want to be locked in a box in terms of the things that I am entertained by. I want to see stories from Black people who have a different experience than me. I want to see stories from Asian people or Indian people or whatever. I want to see all of these different stories because I just love being entertained by good stories. It doesn't matter, if it's something that's similar to my experience or not. I just want to see a great story about, great characters from all different kinds of backgrounds. And so this movie is such a vibe for me. I love the family aspect of it. I love his parents. I think his parents are good role models. His dad's a cop. He's trying his best. He's trying his best to be good to his son. His mom is empathetic and thoughtful and heartfelt, but also strong, in the few scenes that she's had. I think this movie, I'm going to have to go back and study this movie in terms of character development because I vibed with all of the characters with very few lines of dialogue, especially Gwen Stacy's father. It didn't take long for me to care about either of these characters, and so I would say that this movie is a masterclass in getting people caring about each character in very few lines, and that's one of the things that I really, really love about this film. The animation style itself is wonderful. I don't know how they do it. It looks like it costs $100 million to make. My goodness, the rendering and the constant the work that has to be done to make this film is so daunting. It makes me scared to even start becoming an animator, but I'm gonna anyways. And I think it just comes down to the characters and their desires and the core conflict of the movie that we get to near the end or in the middle is really, really compelling because both sides make sense. And I think that that's one of the best ways to have a conflict is where you can empathize with and understand both sides of the argument. And I'm not going to give you any spoilers in this video. I might do a spoiler discussion later, but man, I was like, oh, well, this is a good idea, but that's also a good idea. I understand both. The story is really complex, and yet, again, the way it's told to the audience, it takes you by the hand, not in a patronizing way, but you're right along with it every single time. Guys, if you haven't seen this movie yet, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, You need to watch it. It's fantastic. The characters are all great. The voice acting is all great. Like, this is a top 5 movie of the year. Top 5 movie of 2023 for sure. Go and see it. You're doing yourself a disservice if you don't see it. All right. So that's my review for Across the Spider-Verse. Go and see it. That's all I can really say. With that down, let's talk about the hit Netflix show or not of Cleopatra, because that's interesting. So going back to this is where the discussion of diversity and representation takes a bit of a turn, because we're not talking about fictional characters anymore. We're talking about historical figures. And of course, people don't like their history to be tampered with. So of course, there's going to be backlash to Cleopatra. Of course, we got two different sides, because we have people who made the documentary who believe that Cleopatra was black, although, let's be honest, in the documentary, the people who made it, they knew what they were doing. I think they knew that this would be controversial. They did it anyways because they were relying on the controversy to get the show the amount of views it would need in order to be a success, because other than the controversy, this show is not worth watching. And that's not because of the casting. I think the black actress did a great job. This is some history TV channel level quality writing and cinematography. My God, it was like watching the Discovery or History Channel on cable at like 11 p.m. And to the point where I actually put the last episode, I put it on 1.5 speed to get through it quicker, because it was so, it's just a documentary at all. It's a compelling story, but the way it's presented and told is some B level stuff. Honestly, I think you're better off just asking ChatGPT to write you a quick paragraph about the story of Cleopatra. It might be even more accurate, and that's how you learn the story. And for the movie's credit, they give you a lot of information. The story, though, is just presented in just not the most thrilling way. And they make it seem like Cleopatra is this great woman, and obviously she was, because we know about her. But throughout the entire documentary, it's always presented back up against the wall. And yes, she made some very important decisions and put her mark on history for sure. But the way that she's presented in the documentary seems to contradict the at least for me, the vibe seemed to contradict the core message of what they were saying, is that this is a super powerful woman, whereas what they seemed to present was a woman who's backed up against the wall the whole time and having to do whatever she can to get with a powerful man to protect herself. And that's a bit of a cynical review. I understand that, but it just struck me as a little bit of odd. But again, it's history, right? So if that's the true story, then you got to tell the true story, which comes back to the casting. This is where I am going to give, a big disclaimer. I'm not a historian at all. Okay, there's two sides to the argument. You got PhD professors on one side saying that she was probably black. You have PhD professors on the other side. I am too ignorant to argue with either of them. So I'm going to let the academics just argue about it to themselves and leave it be. But it makes sense, especially if, Egypt believes that, they are the way they are, and that's the way it's always been. Of course there's going to be backlash. And there's something to say about, people co-opting other people's stories for political agendas. And, we talked about the Little Mermaid a little while back. I think it's understandable that people are angry. History, I do believe that if you're making a documentary, you have an obligation to honor the people who are from that land and, tell the story truthfully, or don't call it a documentary. Honestly, you don't call it a documentary if you're not going to tell the truth. But I'm sure the people who made it thought that they were telling the truth. But even the show itself, in the show Cleopatra, in the first or second episode, they say, well, we don't really have any evidence for which race she would have been. Egypt was very diverse. And again, I don't know if that's true because I don't I'm not a historian. And so basically I would say it's understandable that people are mad about Cleopatra. I'm mad at it not for the reasons that most people are. I'm mad because it's aside from the casting controversy, there's really no reason to be interested in this show. Again, the best way I can describe it is History Channel level quality. Like that's what it is. I think the actors did an okay job, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see any of them in anything else after this. Um, and I would not be surprised if the numbers come out that Cleopatra has a massive drop in viewership after the first episode. I think a lot of people just check this show out because of the controversy, which I'm sure the creators were hoping. But I can't see, unless you're a reviewer like me, or you're just absolutely bored or high or drunk or whatever, it's like, why would you keep watching the show when there's so much else to watch? So much things that are better in that genre. And so my review, History Channel level quality is my thoughts on Cleopatra. I'm going to stay out of the controversy because I don't have the education to know which side is correct. And so those are my thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel because we're going to be doing this podcast every week, maybe even twice a week, depending on my schedule, to get all of your movie news and thoughts. And I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.